Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, and it's been a hot minute, about a month, outside of Lorebeard's episodes, since really having sat down and done much in the way of content, just because a lot of real life stuff's been going on, between getting a new car and just life, dealing with a lot of life. But, in any event, I have a lot of things to talk about. But as you may have guessed from the title, there's one thing I want to get out of the way first with this first video, which is that I really want to sit down and talk about I'm going to call it a first impression. I don't want to say review because I haven't finished the game yet. I would like to get through the full story before I actually give like an intense review on it, though I am going to do that. But I do want to take the time, just because it's coming out, to talk about Realms of Ruin. So I did get early access. I've been following this game for a long time. Warhammer Age of Sigmar Realms of Ruin, what a mouthful, is basically the next major effort to try and make a good Age of Sigmar game. It is a real-time strategy game that revolves around, essentially, there are a series of capture points on maps, and your goal is to try and acquire the capture points to build up resources that you then use to buy units and get upgrades, and then defeat your opponent by using various abilities and units and tactics. If you have played Dawn of War 2, it is very familiar to that system of play. I've heard some people maybe try and compare it against Dawn of War 3, but I never played Dawn of War 3, so I don't have the experience to know if that's a more accurate description. But for me personally, it felt incredibly similar to Dawn of War 2, though I do think it's better than Dawn of War 2 in a lot of ways, but I'll get into that. So this isn't going to be a super long video. This is really just going to be me trying to communicate my initial thoughts on it. I have about a little over 10 hours in the game, and most of that has been spent in the single player campaign. Which, to focus on that, I will say so far, I believe I'm about halfway done with the campaign, and I think I've put something like 7 or 8 hours-ish, I think, into the main campaign. It is incredibly fun. It is a full-on story with very excellent voice acting, incredible graphics, and everything is like motion capture, and looks really, really good. So the cutscenes are absolutely phenomenal. It's got a very lovely cast of characters, and I was initially very worried that the game was going to be purely from the perspective of the Stormcast Eternals, who are one of the playable races, but that is not the case, which I'm very glad about. There is a single campaign, which takes you through the entire story, which is quite a few chapters, and you play as every single race throughout the course of the story. In a way that works very, very well. So far in my playthrough, I think I'm on the... I want to say I'm on the 10th or 12th mission. And I have played as everyone except the Night Haunt so far, which I'll get into the factions in a little bit. But the characters are all very, very fun. I think it does a absolutely phenomenal job of communicating what Age of Sigmar is about, where each of the factions really feel like they're very appropriate interpretations of what makes those factions fun and special. You know, it's a little over the top at times, but in a good way, in a fun way. Kind of like how the Total War Warhammer voice acting and character portrayals can be kind of over the top. It's very similar in that sense. It's what you would expect and want, in my opinion, from a Warhammer game. But I think the story is genuinely a ton of fun. It has quite a few, at least in... like I said, I'm about 50% of the way through it. It's had some really enjoyable twists and turns. You get to see a lot of different aspects of what life is like in the Age of Sigmar universe, as the story mainly revolves around what's called a Dawnbringer crusade. So in Age of Sigmar, there is a thing going on right now. So this is a contemporary story in the modern edition of Age of Sigmar, which is that basically, there are a series of cities all across the 8 realms, and many of these cities, pretty much all of them, are attempting to expand through what are called Dawnbringer crusades. So these are a bunch of individuals get together and they march out of their cities to go either establish a new city or to accomplish some particular goal. And basically what is going on in Realms of Ruin is that in the realm of beasts, also known as the realm of Gur, there is a city that has been established by one of these crusades, which is called Harcanibus. But the city of Harcanibus has fell on really, really hard times. They are grossly outnumbered. They are heavily outmanned, and they are struggling. And there is a wizard character named Demetrius who is an Azerite wizard, so he's a wizard of the lore of heavens, which means he's very good at portents and seeing the future and stuff. He has seen a bunch of portents that basically tell him that Harcanibus is going to be destroyed unless they go get this crazy, super powerful artifact. So the story revolves around you going to get the artifact and then bringing it back to Harcanibus, and what is the fallout of the decisions that are being made by various characters. So the Stormcast Eternal campaign, the Stormcast Eternals are kind of the main characters of Age of Sigmar. They're kind of the poster child faction. Though, to be honest, the later you get in the lore, kind of the less important they are, which I do think is a good thing. But for this game, they feature kind of as your good guy faction, and are the main defenders of the city. I think the story does an excellent job of portraying the Stormcast Eternals and really delving into what makes them unique versus just kind of regular humans. The good and the bad side of what comes with them. I think the game actually does a reasonably good job. It was written by Gav Thorpe, the story was, and I think he does an excellent job kind of portraying a lot of the positives and negatives of the Stormcast Eternals. Not as heavy into some of the negatives, though that might appear later in the story, because when Stormcast die, they can't, they're immortal, they get shot back to Azir as bolts of lightning, where they are reforged, but going through the reforging process often comes with some really nasty downsides, which is basically like fantasy magic induced dementia on steroids a lot of the time. But anyway, the other factions, you have the Auric War Clans, which focuses on one of the sub-factions of the Auric War Clans, which are the Cruel Boys. And the Cruel Boys are a very, very unique form of greenskin to Age of Sigmar, where your stereotypical orcs, like the orcs of Warhammer Fantasy, have kind of been reimagined into like the Iron Jaws for the most part, which are your very gorky greenskins, right? Your big wah orcs that wear lots of metal, and they just want to run up and charge, and they don't care about tactics or strategy or anything like that, and they just want to bash your face in. Cruel Boys are the morky side. So they're the cunning and cruel and clever boys. So they hide out in the swamps of Gur and cause all sorts of mischief, and they're very big into stealth, poisons, very tactical, and they're very backstabbing, nasty bastards. And the story does a beautiful job of portraying the Cruel Boys. I actually think the Cruel Boys have the funnest aspects of the story. The Cruel Boys are not as haha funny as most greenskins are. They do have some pretty hilarious moments, but they are quite sinister. And you follow a war boss, which are called kilobosses for the Cruel Boys, named Denkfear, and especially his shamans. And it's a very, very interesting story that very heavily revolves around what's known as an endless spell in Age of Sigmar, which endless spells are basically spells that are cast that are so powerful that they're able to continue going after they've been unleashed. So getting rid of them can be very difficult. And if you're not careful, they can functionally take on their own sentience and become self-perpetuating horrible things. So the game actually introduces a brand new endless spell, which I really, really hope we get in tabletop for the Cruel Boys, because it's really fun. But I don't want to get any further into that for spoilers. You then have the Night Haunt, which are led by a Knight of Shrouds by the name of Lord Gloam. Lord Gloam is easily the most mysterious character in the story. Like I said, I'm 50% of the way through, and while he has shown up in a lot of cutscenes, we have yet to really get his moment. And as I said, I have not been able to actually play as the Night Haunt yet. I've played as a lot of factions around them, but I've not played as them just yet. And then last, and he is a very fun character, his own bit. I really enjoy the mystery they're building up around him and what exactly he's up to. It kind of gives off the vibes that he's actually the good guy. We'll see what happens when we get to the end of the story, but it really feels like Lord Gloam is actually the good guy trying to prevent horrible things from happening. And then last is Strelka, who is a Magisterix of Tzeentch. and she is super fun. She's probably one of my favorite portrayals of a Tzeentchian character I've seen in a really long time, where she basically kind of has a split personality, and the way they're portrayed is very, very fun. And the Disciples of Tzeentch, the way you get to play as them is very, very clever, in that you play as them as part of the campaign, but you're mostly looking at them from an angle in the far distant past, which adds a lot of really enjoyable spreads into the story. But that's enough on that. Hopefully, if that sounds like it piques your interest, I think it's fairly well written. You know, it's a Warhammer story. It's not gonna blow your mind per se, but you know, if you're looking for like the most epic story game of the year thing, this is not it. But if you know what to expect from a Warhammer storyline, I think you're gonna have a blast, and I think you will be pleasantly surprised by how many twists and turns there are. And it also is very long. It is an impressively long story. I would say if you're playing it through on the easiest difficulty, you could probably brute force your way through it in about 10 hours. But it's going to take me considerably longer than that. Which leads me into talking about difficulty. So the game, it is a very micro-intensive strategy game. Very similar, in my mind, to kind of like the older Dawn of War titles, but also almost kind of in the level of StarCraft levels of micromanagement. You don't have to have super intense micro, but if your micro is not excellent, the AI is going to beat your ass. The AI is incredibly well programmed. It is a extremely difficult opponent on even like not the hardest difficulty. I have been playing various matches where I've been kind of messing around with the different like skirmish type modes, or modes where there's not a story mission, you're just playing like a normal mission. And playing the second hardest AI has been brutal for me. On the campaign, I have been playing the highest difficulty, which is incredibly brutal. It is not unusual at all that I'm going to fail the mission the first time, because I'm just going to get the crap slapped out of me. And I will have to learn how to adapt to what the AI is going to do so that I can squeak through the mission. But every mission offers you main objectives, side objectives, and then there's bonus objectives. I have been struggling a lot to get completion on any of them. I think I've only, think of like the 10 or 12 that I've beaten, maybe only like 3 or 4 have I 100%ed, because it's that hard. But I enjoy the difficulty, and there's 4 difficulty levels. So if you're someone that struggles a lot with it, I think the easiest difficulty is perfectly fine. But it does have a lot of really interesting micro elements to it. There are capture points all along the maps that I talked about earlier, and you're able to capture them, and you can build types of buildings on them that either harvest more resources or turn into like towers or healing bases and stuff. And the thing that's really interesting about the game is that it has a couple of unique design decisions, in the sense that virtually every single unit in the game has an ability that you will be using hotkeys to activate, because you're not going to be able to respond fast enough just by clicking to survive. You're going to need to like pay attention to using control groups and make sure you're using hotkeys to really get the most out of your units. There's also kind of a unique system where when units are engaged in combat, they cannot leave combat unless you give them a retreat order, and a retreat order makes them run all the way back to your home base. So the game heavily incentivizes you to try really hard to make sure that you keep your ranged units out of combat and have kind of a bodyguard always around them, while also watching out for enemy units that may have abilities to get past your screens. Because if your ranged units get tied up in combat, you have to retreat them functionally, unless you think you can get them out by killing their enemy really fast, because you cannot walk out of a combat, which has some really interesting things, aspects to it. But to kind of wrap this up really fast, because I've already been talking longer than I meant to, as far as other modes, there is a conquest mode, which is basically an endless pseudo randomizer for single player. So it puts up a map and your goal is to survive to the end of the map. It is quite difficult, but I think it's extremely fun. A lot of the maps will have randomized effects, shall we say. So there might be something like all the abilities are free, because normally the abilities cost resources to activate. But there might be a map where they're all free, so you can just spam the hell out of everything you have. I've seen another one where all the units move like way faster than they normally do, which can greatly affect your strategies and how you try and respond to certain attacks. I've seen another one where like the AI starts with like a massive advantage in victory points to make it more difficult for you, or one where the AI's zone of control shrinks much faster than it normally does, which gives you a huge advantage. So there's all kinds of like different modifiers on a lot of the maps. Outside of that, there's multiplayer, of course. Multiplayer has 1v1 modes and I believe a 2v2 mode. There's only 4 factions in the game right now. Granted, the 4 factions I think are very well rounded. I think they're extremely balanced against one another. There are different things they excel at. They have different abilities, different focuses on gameplay styles, where you have things like the Night Haunt can be very swarm heavy, and they also kind of have like shields that build up when they're not in combat, but when their shields are finally down, they are significantly squishier than any of the other factions. But on the other side, you have like the Stormcast Eternals, who have notably less models per unit, but their guys are far more elite and reliable. But it's kind of a sticky situation to really keep track of making sure you're getting the most out of all your guys. The Cruel Boys have a massive amount of debuffs they're able to make effect out of. Tzeentch is very, very ability heavy, relying on a lot of spells and unique abilities to try and lure opponents into certain situations where they can then punish them. They all have different focuses. And the multiplayer, in my experience, has been quite fun. I've played a couple matches against a few folks that also had early access, and I have greatly enjoyed it. It is because the game is so micro heavy, it can swing very quickly, even if you get ahead a lot on victory points. If your opponent just, really starts really cracking down on their micro or responding well to your tactics, they can swing the game back quite reliably. In addition, for people that are on the more creative side of things, there are 2 really fun additional features, which there's an army painter, which is always a plus. It is quite solid. Really allows you to have a lot of fun with the customization of what your faction looks like. All of the factions are available in the army painter, and there's quite a few different paints to select from. So you can really make your faction look really unique and iconic, which is a lot of fun. There's also a map editor, which allows players to create their own maps, which is extremely well made and should be really, really awesome for players. Especially because if this game is going to have longevity in any kind of like of a tourney scene, which I hope it does, I genuinely hope that it does, it's going to probably need more maps, because there's only like, for skirmish mode, I want to say there's like maybe 20 maps, maybe, I think it's less than that. So there's not like a ton, but with the help of a map editor, communities will be able to make their own maps, which I think could provide a lot of fun. But that's pretty much all I'm going to say about it for right now. I would say that this game is a very hard recommend from me. If you like Age of Sigmar at all, this is a hard recommend. If you really enjoy kind of that micro-intensive gameplay that we saw back in the heydays of Dawn of War 2, it's not like Dawn of War 1. It's very Dawn of War 2. Though the armies that you'll have, I think, are significantly larger than the Dawn of War 2, because it's not squads. You're playing with like full-sized groups. You can have quite a few units on the battlefield when you like tech up all the way. There's like faction abilities when you get your main buildings all the way up to tier 4. But it's a very fun game. I think the campaign alone, in my opinion, is worth the price of entry. It's a $60 game, so it's the price of a normal full-size game, because it feels like a lot of games are going towards $70 these days. But it's $60. I will have a link to Fanatical down below if you want to pick up the game and support the channel while doing so. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, there's not the usual Fanatical discount on it. which I asked about, but unfortunately is just not something that's happening with this game. So you don't have to use it by any means. It's going to cost the same as it would anywhere else. But if you want to support the channel, you can do that there. I do think this game has a really, really strong foundation. Like the core gameplay is incredibly engaging and incredibly fun. And I think if they continue to support the game and add more different kinds of content and modes, that it could be an incredibly successful game. Like this, to me, this feels like the Age of Sigmar game I've been waiting for. There have been a couple of other Age of Sigmar games that have come out that I had high hopes for, and I played them, and they just didn't keep me going, you know, or like they were strong at the beginning and then they fell off really hard. This game is not those games. It has remained consistently awesome for over 10 hours, or roughly 10 hours, and the difficulty is incredibly satisfying. If I wasn't so busy, I would have been playing a lot more of it, and I'm going to be starting a new playthrough of the campaign on stream later today. But I just wanted to come on and recommend the game to you guys. I am at the end of this video going to include a conversation that I had with one of the lead figures over at Frontier, one of the lead developers, as well as Gav Thorpe. I got to sit down with them for roughly 30 minutes and talk to them about some various things. You know what? In retrospect, I'm not going to include it in this video. I'm going to include it in the review video, I think, because I don't want this video to be 50 minutes long. So thank you all very much for watching. I hope this was at least somewhat informative. But do let me know if you have picked up Realms of Ruin and had a chance to play it. Let me know what you think down in the comment section. I have a lot of stuff I'm going to be putting out here because I've been gone, so there's a lot of things that have built up that I need to cover, and I hope you're all safe and taking care of yourselves and staying healthy and all that jazz out there, and I'll see you around. Thanks for watching.